in your book, Color of Money, you really get into the specific steps that, of course, overlap across the board, class, race, gender, and so on. But you focus specifically on the racial dimension of the history of this country, from obviously slavery, but also Jim Crow, and then through various policy mechanisms to keep wealth out of black hands, essentially. Can you kind of tell that story to us?
Yeah. So, I think it all starts with Reconstruction and the Civil War. And I think the U.S. Economy, was obviously there's a whole new capitalism debate about whether slavery was profitable or not. And what's interesting about this question is, for a while, the history was that, look, slavery was this backwards institution that capitalism was going to wipe out anyway. And, therefore, it wasn't like the plantation economy was this not profitable. Yes, it was horrendous, but the question of profitability has been core in this debate. And there's this new literature out there that's really examining this and saying, no, actually, slavery was quite efficient and quite profitable. And why does this question matter now, right? And it matters because if slavery was backwards and unprofitable, then it has nothing to do with capitalism. If slavery was incredibly profitable and efficient, this is the end result of capitalism, right? And so what does capitalism end up with? I think a libertarian would say, well, capitalism ends up with freedom for everyone. And I think someone else might say, well, actually, capitalism might end up with those with capital using that capital to enslave other human beings, because that is really profitable if you don't have to pay for labor,
Right.
And so after this breaks down during the Civil War, there's this quick, scramble to get black labor back into growing cotton. And the idea was, if they got land like the freed slaves got in Haiti, then there's no way that they would grow cotton. They would grow subsistence crops, because that's what the Haitian slaves had done. Because if you have a tract of your own land, you're going to feed your family first. And cotton is a debt crop. So you're going to maybe plant a little bit of cotton, but not so much. And so because we had to make them have cotton, because, New York and Liverpool and the whole country is relying on that cotton, it was really important not to get land. Now, why did I go into this story? Because this plays out over and over again, is when you have this pivotal moment, like Reconstruction was, where Black Americans are about to get full-fledged freedom. And every leader, Frederick Douglass, Sherman, Lincoln, was convinced that without land, you actually don't have freedom, because you can't participate freely if you're going to be just labor. And indeed, that's what happened, right? You got emancipation, but then a quick re-enslavement into, sharecropping and debt. And so I think there has been this consistent through history, reliance on our economy becoming racialized and needing blacks as labor. And when that sort of cotton economy breaks down, and you have the Great Migration, I track this historically in the book, and you've got Black migrants coming up north. There's this segregation that happens, and that is sort of where the industrial economy, builds on the backs of Black labor. Again, it's less crucial, right? The industrial firms are happy to take immigrants of all sorts, but the segregation patterns remain intact. And so I sort of track banks, because that's what I know, and also because banks reveal the formation of capital and the blocks to that capital. And so what I've shown through the book in following banks and following labor and capital is that Blacks, having lived in a segregated economy, and because of the Jim Crow laws, were never able to accumulate capital. And because they weren't able to accumulate capital, they were never able to fully participate in the voting process and to secure their freedom through the vote. Which is why you have the 15th Amendment, and then we have the Civil Rights era, which is like, okay, we really meant that, right? With the Voting Rights Act. But it didn't have to happen that way. It could have been that they just had the vote. And then the New Deal, I think by the time that, 1934, like Blacks are kind of voting in these machines, but the New Deal also creates, wealth for the white middle class, and that's a misnomer. I think people say, oh, well, the white middle class got mortgages through the New Deal, and I sort of describe it differently. The New Deal creates a white middle class. Before that, you have white blue-collar workers in the industrial North, and all of a sudden it's cheaper to own your own home and have a mortgage and live in this beautiful suburb full of white people instead of paying rent in some, squalid city, except for blacks were specifically excluded from all of these New Deal provisions just because of their race. It wasn't a credit function. And that is something that is still in effect. In other words, no, the racial zoning isn't in effect, but those red lines that were created in the New Deal still determine the type of schools that are in the neighborhood, the racial makeup of the neighborhood, and the ability to get a certain kind of loans, right? So you look at where are payday lenders, where are subprime loans being targeted, et cetera. And it's all in those red-lined areas. And so I showed that sort of disparate economy that forms because of those policy decisions.
Right. And also to me, I always think I like that Marx's idea of that primitive accumulation, these sort of instead of markets, they don't just sort of magically arise. There is always a kind of time when you take a commons and you turn it into a private asset or something like that. And when I was reading you, I kind of thought it's not a direct comparison, but there was this way. It was just we have a slave labor force, which is going to build all this on the house. And then there's going to be all of these different mechanisms where we're going to sort of perpetuate that underclass experience. And obviously we're going to build all of these, cultural justifications around that. But the root of it is economic. And in light of that, it's how could there even be this notion that it wouldn't be efficient strikes me as something that any 6-year-old would understand. Yes, if I pay you nothing and you build a whole economy for me, that's a win.
Right.
Right.
Well, we'll talk about the Quillette piece, but one of the things is slavery wasn't profitable because look at, some of there were poor people in the South, but that doesn't capture what slavery was. Slavery was a cotton producing and a tobacco producing endeavor. And where do those profits go? Always to the capitalists. Right. Are they all in the South? Absolutely not. The plantation owners are in the South and they get plenty of profits, but there's New York traders, there's Liverpool traders. There are literally slave-backed securities being traded through the banks. And so that's a lot of money that is not captured on that plantation. It built the economy of the North and in Great Britain. And so really, those are profits that don't go away during the Civil War. Some of the plantation money does, but those riches built on the backs of slaves remain and make a lot of people rich.